Hello everyone, thank you very much for joining me this afternoon. My name is Brian Dye and I've been a licensed registered dental technician in British Columbia, Canada for the last 45 years. I've also owned my own orthodontic dental lab for the last 35 years. Now in doing this, there's not a day that goes by that I don't talk about skeletal relations. Now skeletal relations in dentistry are the relationship between the mandible and the skull. A lateral or head plate x-ray or a cephalometric x-ray is used to accurately locate these skeletal relations. In this video, we provide overwhelming evidence that skeletal class II is the common link that causes balding. This video clearly shows the vulnerability of the superficial temporal artery when coupled with a dislocated mandible. This video is 100% factual because every component of this video is measurable. If you can measure something, it's a fact. Now, this is a time-sensitive issue that needs to begin before hair loss. This procedure does not grow hair follicles. This procedure prevents balding, meaning you'll never lose your hair, you'll never experience balding. Free instruction for protocol on this treatment is available at the end of the video. These skeletal relations come in classifications of skeletal class I, skeletal class II, and skeletal class III. I will not be talking much about skeletal class I because this is where the mandible belongs. I will mainly be talking about the two dislocated positions of skeletal class I, which are skeletal class II and III. Now here we have skeletal class II and III on the screen as well as I, and I'd like you to look at skeletal class I first, where it is called the norm. Now you can see that the black arrows line up. The teeth are in a nice interdigitated location. The lips and the chin are nice and flat on the face, as opposed to skeletal class II to the right, where we have obviously the mandible and the lips and the teeth are retracted, making skeletal class II look like they have buck teeth. Now if you look at the polar opposite of skeletal class II, which is skeletal class III on the left hand side, you can see that the teeth don't line up. The arrows, the bottom arrow is advanced. The lips on the mandible on the lower are forward ahead of the upper lips, and the teeth are forward, and everything's growing in the red arrow direction. Now this is a anatomically correct skull, and it's the same skull for all three positions. First, I'd like you to focus on the middle screen of skeletal class I, and if you look at the brass clasp that holds the vertex of the skull on, there's a red line directly below the brass clasp. It's faint, but it's there. Now if you follow that to the base of the skull, it terminates there. Now, just to the right of that red line is the condyle of the mandible that is sitting on the meniscus in the glenoid fossa. This is correct. This is where it belongs, because you can see the profile is nice and flat, the teeth are interdigitated, and the chin is in the correct position. And this is the way it should be. Now, if you look at skeletal class II, where we have the mandible, the teeth are retracted, the skull looks like it's got buck teeth, the chin is retracted, and if you look at the condyle at the red line on the skull, it's on and beyond the red line. And this is normal for skeletal class II. Now if we go to the polar opposite of skeletal class II, which is skeletal class III, on the left hand side of the screen, you can see the lower teeth are advanced, the chin is advanced. Now if you look at the condyle in the red line, there's at least a centimeter between the two. So clearly the mandible is free to move in that glenoid fossa depending on where the teeth are. Now, I need to explain some facts about the mandible. The mandible is the strongest bone in the body. It's also coupled with the strongest muscle in your body, the masseter. Now you can see the masseter is broad, short, but it's very powerful, and it is capable of limited forward and backward motion. Now, the bone that the masseter grips is the mandible, and it is strong, and it does not fold, shrink, or stretch. So if there is movement at the front end of the mandible, there is equal and identical movement at the back end of back end of the mandible, like this video. The mandible is made up of 5 different components. First, we have the teeth, which are embedded in cortical bone, and directly beneath the cortical bone is the body of the mandible that connects the teeth, the cortical bone, the chin, and the angulated portion of the mandible bone called the ramus. The ramus delivers the mandible to the base of the skull. On the end of the ramus, there is a rounded polished portion called the condyle. The condyle fulcrums in a dimple on the base of the skull called the glenoid fossa. The fossa has a meniscus like any other joint in the body, and the condyle should be equally centered in the glenoid fossa. Now, if you look at the screen and get familiar with what we're looking at, we have the mandibular condyle, the yellow bone on the bottom, and then we have the glenoid fossa pocket dimple on the top. They're both lined with blue lines. Now, this patient or this person's mouth is open, and you can tell that because there's gaps between the meniscus and the condyle and the glenoid fossa. When this person goes to chew, that condyle goes directly into the fat portion of the glenoid fossa, the belly, right up where the arrow points. Now it goes directly in. When it does that, the meniscus spreads out evenly to cover all the bone, protects the bone for the final fulcruming chew. Now when this mandible comes out, the condyle comes out of the glenoid fossa, it returns to its balanced equal position. Now we can tell that it's equally centered. If you look at the left-hand side of the screen on the retrodiscal side of things, where we have the 2 blue lines that terminate at the end of the disc, that measurement, that width, can be found on the anterior discal side of things on the right-hand side of the screen, where that width is the same. Now, if this condyle wasn't centered, it would be obvious that one side would be closer to the base of the skull than the other. But before I talk about these pressures that move the condyle forward or backward, I'd like you to watch this video.
Hey guys, I'm here with my buddy, Mr. Roman Atwood.
What's
up? I saw a video of James Corden doing this with Melissa McCarthy and Kristen Shaw. I saw him do this.
It's ridiculous.
It is, it's ridiculous. And so
I'm
it's so
nervous.
ridiculous that I wanted to try it and he was like, okay, we gotta do this. We take these.
Oh my god, here we go. That's alright.
Yeah, that's great.
Let's do it.
I have
The-
saltine crackers.
The driest food you could get.
Yeah. 1, 2, 3.
That's alright. You can't swallow.
Oh God, check out the
You cannot swallow. I'm gonna choke.
I got us an apple.
Oh, perfect.
Good.
Perfect. Oh, that's so bad. I can do it. I can do an apple. You ate the sticker.
Balloons.
There goes my head.
I still have crackers in my house.
Are you serious?
Yeah, try it.
Dude, I got some.
I got some.
Oh my god. You watch it? That worked. Oh, I think I'm bleeding.
Here we go.
I got a choke. You're an animal.
This is so hard. Oh no, don't look down. Don't look down. Look down, look down.
Dessert.
I got this. Nor's drumstick.
Dude, it's just dripping out of my mouth.
It's a new flavor. It's Nor's.
I'm so hungry.
Who owns a drumstick that way?
All
Cheers.
right, cheers. Don't hurt again. Not so bad. It won't stay. Oh god, you're ugly. Oh my god. Your list's so cold.
How you doing? Oh god, it's cold.
This is good dessert. It's gonna go.
I
guys are getting sued.
Here are the culprits. The Orbicularis Oris. And if you can see how it's feathered into the buccinator muscle, supplying the Orbicularis Oris with the retraction ability, not just the closing of the mouth over the teeth. Once that's happened, the food is held in. Now it's up to the buccinator to retract and squish the food into your mouth and down your throat. Did you know in orthodontics that it takes less than 1/10 of a gram of pressure to move any tooth anywhere, yet your lips can provide well over 200 grams of pressure, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, with a smile, a grin, or just tight lips. Here's another example of pressure. Let's say you're a dentist and a growing patient between the ages of 8 and 18 comes into your office. You quickly find out they just lost one of their upper front teeth the day before. Now, when you look to see the site where the tooth fell out from, if you don't see an incisal edge or a cusp tip of the replacement tooth staring back at you, in 3 months that space will have closed down by 2 millimeters. In 6 months, that space will have closed down by 4 millimeters. And in 9 months, that space of 6 millimeters is completely closed, and the lower arch still has a full complement of teeth. Now, if you think that's not so bad, it gets worse. If the upper arch that lost the tooth was measured from distal buccal cusp to distal buccal cusp before the arch had collapsed, the total circumferential volume loss would be more like 9 to 12 millimeters, double the space loss that was created or left by the lost tooth. Why? Because the pursing of the lips collapses the premaxilla, retracting from the front and the sides of the mouth. Also, what makes tooth movement easier is we're receptive animals and we love to learn. And when we listen, we place our tongue on our rugae. This is that wrinkly skin behind your upper front teeth. What happens when we do this is your stomatic gnathic system moves forward. Now, our stomatic gnathic system consists of our tongue, our mandibular bone, our mandibular teeth, and all the flesh, arteries, glands, veins, muscle, and fat from your chin to your throat. Now, what happens when the stomatic gnathic system moves forward is the esophageal area clears out, allowing for maximum airflow through the turbinates of the sinus, allowing them to work more efficiently, making for maximum oxygen to be delivered, allowing us to be fully receptive to learn. But the problem is, our teeth are apart. When we posture with our tongue on our rugae, our teeth are apart, sitting ducks for lips. Now consider what I said earlier about the mandible, that it does not fold, stretch, or shrink. So if you were to bite your nails with your front teeth, or untie a knot with your front teeth, or even incise a piece of lettuce with your front teeth, your mandible comes forward. Now I want you to feel that. So I'd like you to place your fingers in front of your external mutus, your ear, and put a little bit of pressure on there, and then bite your nails, incise that lettuce, or untie that knot, and you'll feel the condyle come out of the glenoid fossa. Now when it comes out, that's what it's like to be class 3. You can feel this for yourself. So speaking of class 3, here we have a severe class 3 on the left-hand side and a severe skeletal class 2 on the right-hand side. So this is what I want you to remember about all skeletal class 3s. Now I chose this severe case because it's far easier to understand and see what I'm talking about than if you were to use a mild case of skeletal class 3. So here's what I want you to remember about skeletal class 3 is the mandible bone and teeth are forward ahead of the maxillary bone process and teeth, whether it's by 1/10 of a millimeter or 10 or more millimeters, all because the maxilla is deficient. Now if you look at the skeletal class 3 model, you can easily see that the maxilla on the top is deficient because the mandible on the bottom is on the outside and in front of the maxilla. And the red lines on the upper model and the lower model of the skeletal class 3 are supposed to line up. That's their skeletal position, but you can see that it's not the case. So again, what I want you to remember about the skeletal class 3 is the mandible bone and teeth are forward ahead of the maxillary bone process and teeth, all because of the deficient maxilla. Now I'm going to talk about the polar opposite of skeletal class 3, which is skeletal class 2. Even though skeletal class 2 and skeletal class 3 are polar opposites, they both share a deficient maxilla. Skeletal class 3 mandibles are placed forward on the outside of the deficient maxilla, and skeletal class 2's mandible and teeth are trapped on the inside of a deficient maxilla that is ever increasingly shrinking. The shrinking maxilla causes the upper anterior teeth to retract, and you can see that on the right-hand side of the screen. The skeletal class 2 upper front teeth are not even visible. They're retracted so far. And there's a price for that because the upper front teeth are retracted, causing the lower front teeth to have to move out of the way or break or bite yourself. And you can see that in the dentition, the anatomical marks on the upper and the lower showing the lower is retracted. Now if you look at just below skeletal class 2, there's a schematic that says normal occlusion and loss of friction. I want you to focus on normal occlusion for a moment because this is how in dentistry we want your upper and lower front teeth to contact, and there's a reason for that. The lower front teeth hit on the incisal edge, very tip of the lower front teeth, because the way they're built, they have a bit of a laminated configuration that when they contact the upper front teeth on the lingual side, on the back side, at this angle, they have somewhat of a chalkboard friction feel. And that allows tooth placement or contact, but when you bite down on these teeth, the vector force is in the direction of the black arrow as shown. And the reason for that, this is a good thing because this keeps the lips in check. The lips cannot penetrate this shape of the mouth because the angle of the teeth forces the lips when they apply pressure just to split off and turn into a smile, as opposed to the right-hand side of the screen where we have skeletal class 2 and the loss of friction picture directly below that imitates the teeth on the upper skeletal class 2 model and the lower front teeth of the skeletal class 2 model. Now when the teeth contact like this, there is no incisal edge, there is no friction, they're hitting on a broad enamel surface that might as well be the north side of Everest on an icy day because they slip right past each other. Now when you go to bite down on these teeth in this position, the vector force is in the direction of the black arrow because you have 200 grams of pressure on these lips. And the mandible is hinging on a soft tissue based meniscus that when you bite, the lower front teeth are going to follow the upper front teeth, and you can clearly see that that direction is backward. The vector force in this direction is the direction of the black arrow. Now, the positioning of these teeth in a more straight up and down position eliminates the friction of occlusal contact. By steepening the slope of the upper anterior teeth, this shifted angle of the front teeth will now assist distal movement of the mandible, along with continual pressure from the lips. So this screen here shows the same scenario but with the mouth open. Now, the last screen showed the teeth together, and this screen shows the teeth apart where the patient has to go to eat. Now this position changes daily because the upper anterior teeth have been retracted every day. So when they go to bite, they hit their upper anterior teeth first and realize that in order to chew their food properly at the back, they have to retract the mandible. Now there's only one way to do this, is recruit the masseter muscle that we talked about earlier that has some limited movement and allows the mandible to move into clearance so the back teeth can touch. But what happens when you do this is you reach forward to bite, your condyle moves into the glenoid fossa, the space is taken up, you're on your meniscus, and your teeth don't touch. So now you're faced with the option that you've got the food in your mouth, you're going to eat. So you drag the mandible back with the masseter, and this becomes a bite, drag, chew scenario. Next comes the perforated meniscus. Because the condyle now fulcrums at the distal aspect of the glenoid fossa, the perforated meniscus bunches up and gets dragged over the retaining lip feature of the glenoid fossa. The meniscus acts like a ramp and allows the condyle to escape from the glenoid fossa. This allows the mandible to continue to distalize. In the last 35 years of orthodontics, I've been very privileged to be involved in over 400 cephalometric X-ray workups, where it's very common to have that 16 millimeter retrognathic mandible, and very common to have the 18 and the 22 millimeter retrognathic mandible as well. Obviously not as often as the 16, but weekly people come in with this dental scenario. Now let's find out where the vertex follicle pad of the head gets its blood from. The vertex follicle pad of the head covers the height of contour of the head, which is the very top of it. Now, the vertex follicle pad of the head receives its blood from the frontal and parietal portions of the superficial temporal artery. Those are the orange arteries on the top of the skull. But its blood origins are the external carotid artery, down in the throat in the red. Did you know that the vertex follicle pad of the head is an organ that has no nerve and no muscle? The only means of communication to the body is through blood. Now, let's go down and visit that external carotid artery as it moves upward and quickly splits away to the occipital portion of the head. This is the yellow arteries in the back of the head. We all know this to be the donor site for hair implants. Why? Because no one ever goes bald there. Why? Well, here's how I see it. The landscape is flat and all the moving skeletal structures are about 12 millimeters away, and the superficial temporal artery is just 2 millimeters below the skin, free and clear of any occlusion. Now let's go back to the trunk of the superficial temporal artery, where it passes an intimate 3.25 millimeters distal to the condyle. Now this is plenty of clearance for a healthy skeletal class 1 condyle, but not for a retrognathic mandible of skeletal class 2 where the condyle occludes on the superficial temporal artery, stopping blood flow to the frontal and parietal portions of the superficial temporal artery. Complete occlusion of the superficial temporal artery means you are going to be or already completely bald. Partial occlusion of the superficial temporal artery means you will retain some of the hair on the vertex of your head. Even if you are already bald, you should still fix the skeletal issue because it causes TMD, sleep apnea, impacted wisdom teeth, perforated meniscus, Bell's palsy, and a complete breakdown of the mastication system. I think the future looks bright with this new information. It gives the worried patient some hope, and it gives new direction for an occupation to specialize in.